Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard.
Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on our podcast. His name is Mike, and he's going to talk to us about the 28th Amendment. So welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Friends, today we are here with the mentality that the show must go on. I am in Austin, Texas, and we've had a drought this summer. Except for this week, we're having lots of rain. And because we like to have the show must go on, it's raining, so if you hear that in the background, that's what's going on, and we're going to record regardless of what's going on out there. So, Mike, if you can kindly get started by giving an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Okay, my name is Mike Turcott. I live up in Maine. I am a graduate of Xavier University in organizational leadership and Spring Hill College in Mobile with leadership and ethics. I am currently a caregiver. I was a ethics professor at the local community college, and I also been involved in the redistricting and voter alternative programs for about 12 years now. In 2011, I filed suit against the redistricting commission in Maine because it was just controlled by political parties and no alternatives were invited. And Maine has the largest voting bloc is unenrolled.
Oh.
Or independents, we call them. But so what I'm here to talk about is the 28th Amendment, which the proposed 28th Amendment, which was basically it's a congressional, not necessarily term limits, but time limits on service, and I am looking to put an amendment amount that people can serve up to 24 years in not only the House and Senate, but also in the Supreme Court. And it's except for the case where somebody is elected to the Senate in the 22nd year of their service, where they get to go to 28 years. The idea is just basically to I've noticed in the last few years that there's been a lot of, I'm not going to say dead weight, but there's a point where you look at some of these senators currently, and Dianne Feinstein has been in there for a long time, but she's 90, and it's, are you going to leave, or, another one was Senator from Alabama, Shelby. He was in there for a number of years. Mitch McConnell is another one. So there's currently right now, I'm sorry, do you mind if I keep going here?
Okay, go for it.
Currently right now in the Senate, there's about 18 or 10 to 18 people who have served over 24 years. And in the House, there's 28. And in the Senate, there's 15 of them are over 75. In the House, there's 36 as far as age-wise. But, where most Americans retire at 65, there's 51 in the Senate that are over 65 and 127 in the House. And so as far as the Supreme Court is, we've got obviously Thomas is the longest serving. He's been there for 31 years. So Thomas was nominated when Reagan was the president. So kind of gives you an idea. And then Roberts and Alito are both 17 years in right now.
Yeah.
And then Joe Biden was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 1972.
Oh, my.
So we're looking at okay, you've done your bid for God and country, and I think it's time to, as Kennedy said, pass the torch to the next generation.
Yeah.
And So yeah, that's what I'm working on on my Facebook page, the 28th Amendment. It basically just states withstanding individuals elected and are holding office prior following the ratification date of this amendment by 3/4 of the states, any individual elected to either or both the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate shall serve, except when elected office term ends afterwards, no more than 18 cumulative term-defined calendar years. So this was originally 18 here, but I bumped it up to 24 because it is half your elected, or half. It is half the work life of an average American. So if an American starts at 16 or 18, it's half that time. And the idea was just to kind of get America's best when it keeps reinventing itself. So there is some wisdom when you're been elected for, some people start in their state houses, or like Dianne Feinstein was a mayor of San Francisco. There is wisdom there, but then there also is attitudes that were set back 20 or 25 or 30 years ago that don't necessarily reflect the attitudes or the culture of the society right now. So my whole thing was just to try to say, okay, you've done your bit. Let's move on. Let's keep going. And now it's gotten to the point where, with congressional redistricting and amount of money raised, that it's almost impossible to get, especially down south and some of these senators, it's almost impossible to get them out of office unless they retire. So Shelby last year retired. 2 years ago. And, and then some of the other things that show up for me is that one case in particular was Robert Byrd of West Virginia. He was in office for almost since 1948, and then he, after his 56th or 52nd year, he finally passed away, so he died in office. But he was in a wheelchair. He had to have somebody help him. And then what you have then is a situation where the chief of staff is essentially the quasi-senator.
Yeah.
And because they're so incapacitated, and this is shown up sometimes in Supreme Court justices where they have that lifelong position, and yet some of them don't know when to leave. And so this is more later on. And I granted that the average lifetime of a person keeps extending outward to 72 or 73 now, 74. So it made sense back in the 18th century, 19th century, when Supreme Court justices were appointed, that they would be there for life because it would be less political. But that's when an average lifespan, if you made it to 55 or 60, it was a miracle back then. So modern technology and medicine have made it so people can live longer, but at the same time, we have to look at, in service, yeah, you can be there forever, but do you really need to be there forever? Are you doing your constituents the best service if you don't have the energy level that you had when you first were elected to office? You don't have it now, as opposed to when you were first elected to office. So, Mitch McConnell doesn't want to retire because Democrat governor in Kentucky, so he'll obviously appoint a Democrat. So, or he'll appoint. He said he was going to appoint. Gavin Newsom of California said he was going to appoint a woman of color as an interim senator if Dianne Feinstein retired. So that person had to be interim. So that's the amendment. I've done this. I've also worked on alternatives to presidential primaries. come up with a situation, a voter participation index where it goes order of primaries is based on what your turnout was in the midterms, what your state's turnout was in the midterms, and also how many people are registered to vote during the midterms.
Okay.
So, out of total population. So, right now, I don't know if you want to get into that. If you got any questions, I'm kind of overloading you here. So.
Okay. Yes, I do have questions. I can see somebody possibly objecting to your proposal because on the basis of age and wisdom, they could say that we want older people in office because they have wisdom. We don't want somebody who's 22 to be elected to office, and that's why they like the founders. They've made the minimum ages. So how would you respond to someone thinking along those lines?
Well, that I can get that, and I'm not trying to point this out as ageism in particular, but there's a responsibility of a person in office. If you've got 24 years to leave your mark and do what you need to do and do what you want to do, can you do that in 24 years and then leave?
Enough time, huh?
Yeah, and that should be enough time. But then again, that is a sweet position. If you think about it, you're one of 100 people in a country of 320 million.
Sure,
or you're one of 435. So the situation then becomes is, well, am I here because I can help, or am I here because I just like the gig? And there's some people, and Bill Maher pointed out that Waxman of California, he was there for 30 years, but he was a guy who kept himself out of the spotlight, but he was a grinder. He went in there and did the work and did pass the legislation and worked with members of Congress. But, the average person in the House of Representatives right now is 57 years. The average person in the average Democrat, I'm looking here on Quorum, is in the House leadership is 72 years. I mean,
oh my.
Are you looking at Nancy Pelosi's in her 80s, and Nancy Pelosi has done very well for herself in Congress. But I'm going to go again with, do you want the energy level of Barack Obama, or do you want the energy level at 55 or 54 when he was in office, when his 50s, or do you want the energy level of somebody who's in their 80s? Because that office was, apparently you're under a microscope for 16, 18 hours a day, pumping out. And so, yes, there is an age thing, that there is age with wisdom or wisdom with age. But if you're empathic and you have a level of awareness of what your cause and effect are, then emotional intelligence, that you can understand the big picture. Because it's really, there's a lot of egos in Congress, and there's a lot of people. There's not many of the people show up. The word is the ones like, I've done my bit here.
Okay.
And you look at the senator from Iowa. He's been there he's 90 years old now. And at 90, most people are, like I said, it's not an ageism issue. It's the energy level that the country needs to survive, or the energy level that the country needs to function at a high level. And yes, I can see a lot of people say, well, that's ageism. But if Barack Obama, if the 25th Amendment wasn't there and Barack Obama was available to run again next year, how many people would go into that? Or George Bush, or any other president in the age of 50s, 60s when they get out.
Yeah.
So
you think 50 years of age is a good happy medium where people have enough wisdom yet they still have energy?
Right. I think that shows up, and like I said, I'm going to be accused of all kinds of, discriminatory practice here, but there's a level of intentionality that you need to bring to the position, and that energy or intentionality shows up in your staff.
Okay.
And it says, okay, this guy wants to look at Bernie Sanders. He's in his 80s, but who's the next Bernie Sanders? Who's the next Elizabeth Warren? One of the things I noticed about boomers and leadership is that they don't really cultivate the next generation.
Huh.
And who's going to replace Bernie Sanders? Is there anybody in the House or Senate that's going to step up and say, hey, there's Katie Porter out in California, and now she's running for Senate. If she loses to the gentleman from Adam Schiff, okay, what's her role then? Do you lose that voice now? And so, if you have a situation where somebody's in their 70s or 80s and they don't want to be bothered, or their staff member thinks, well, I'm not going to bring that to them right now. This slight thing that shows up, and then, like I said, if you can't get what you want done in 24 years, are you really an effective? This is kind of a fallacy, but are you there to do what you said you were going to do? Are you there just to occupy a spot? Because it's a good gig.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good accountability. So since you're talking about this being a 28th Amendment, that's not going to affect anything at the local or state level, is it?
No, it's just the Congress.
Okay. So do you see that also as a problem at the local and state levels, or do you think it's a problem mostly at the federal level?
I think it's mostly at the federal level. We do have term limits here in Maine, and you can only run for 4 terms. Each term for senator and representative is 2 years. The problem with that is that there's a senator or a representative up in northern Maine who's basically been on and off as a representative for 30 years, and he wields a lot of power. But the thing that my Senator Angus King wrote back to me when I sent this to him was, I should have vetoed the term limits because it just has this rotational thing to it. So the proposal that Ted Cruz was sending out about term limits was like 3 for representatives and 2 for senators. That's too short because, especially for representatives, because it's 435 minds that you got to convince to get to something that you want to do. And the 24 years, like I said, if you can get it done by then, you've done your bit. So, anyway, go ahead.
Interesting. So with that one in Maine, it's not consecutive. As long as the terms are not consecutive, they can run indefinitely.
Right. So if somebody wants to go in the House, if somebody goes in the House in 5 years and they get defeated, let's look at this classic example. Richard Nixon lost his presidential bid in 60, but came back in 68. There are people who run and then they just, there's a saying that there's no second act in politics, but sometimes this kind of opens up the second act because some people may go back and say, you were there for 15 years or 16 or 14 years, and you run for Senate. Their party may ask them to run for Senate, and there's another 6 or 12 years after that. So, there's the idea is then that it's just a 24 calendar years of service. So
any position, right? So it would cover all positions, right?
Right, any combination. I mean, it's
okay.
Somebody can be in that. Look at Barack Obama. He wasn't even a U.S. senator for 2 years, then he ran for president. Now he's done. But Ted Cruz has got, he wants 2 6-year terms for U.S. Senator and 3 for Congress. And the point of that was when somebody asked Adams, or I think it was Adams or one of their founding fathers, how long these people can serve. They weren't looking at 50 years like Senator Byrd or even 24 years, because they didn't think anybody would want to do the traveling, especially from Georgia or any Kentucky over to the U.S. to Washington D.C. because there was no trains, and your age group was only, the length of the length of your life was going to be no more than average to 50 or 55. So the idea then is just to kind of, modern medicine has done a great job of extending the life, but at the same time, if I'm an individual to serve, if I can't get what I need to get done in 24 years, maybe it's time that I need to let somebody else give it a shot. Or I've tried, I've done my best. Okay, I'm best served by getting the next generation to come in, or the next leaders to step up.
So it encourages people to focus, right?
What's that?
It encourages people to focus so they don't drift in office. It makes them get an agenda or do what they want according to the constituents instead of sit there. So it seems like it gives you a motivation to get moving when they're in office if they can't move.
Yeah, it does. And I think a lot of the party politics now is, well, can we hold that seat?
Yeah.
Shelby of Alabama was in there for a long time. Let me look it up, but he was in there for quite a while. Well, if you're a Republican in Alabama, you're pretty much set to have to be in office once you get in, unless you retire or somebody else, you go on to a better gig. But in the private sector, but the idea then is, well, we have this base of Shelby retired in '89. My dad's 89, and he's on hospice, and I'm taking care of him. So it's like I said, he was in the U.S. Senate from 1987 to 2023, which was roughly 36 years. My senator here up in Maine said she was only going to run. Susan Collins said she was only going to run for 2 terms. She's now on her 5th. So it's tough for voters to hold people accountable when the base is just going to keep putting people back in office.
Sure.
The political base. So, this is kind of a unique thing, but I think it's not public service. It's more public service and less career politicians.
Okay, good. So since it's unique, has there been any other countries who have tried anything like this?
I don't think so. I haven't really looked either.
Okay.
But there's I think that, America, you look at, when the technological advances since, McConnell got into office in 1986. Well, McConnell, there was no cell phones. There wasn't an internet. The attitudes that they carried from that point, the attitudes and values that were instilled in their childhood and their formative college years, that's what they based their decisions on. And so it's not like they're out of touch, but it's just that, it's more towards, I'm grounded in you can imagine what happened back in the 60s when you had all these Southerners who had been raised during the 20s and 30s in the South and how they felt about civil rights.
Yeah.
Have Lyndon Baines Johnson come in there and say, we're going to change this because it isn't right. Well, they formed, in 1948, they had the Dixiecrats run for office or split the Democratic Party, and then they had George Wallace running for office for president. So, Shelby started in 1970 as a state senator in Alabama. and he finally retired at 2023. So, that's 53 years, or 52 if you say that the term ended on January 6th or January 1st or 2nd, whatever, in 2023. That's a long time in politics.
It is.
And then
longer than I've been alive.
Yeah. So you have different attitudes by then, and even your state, Texas, there's John Cornyn, and he's been there for quite a while too. So, but Austin has seen a huge increase in boomers and not boomers, but different attitudes from the West Coast and more of a progressive. More of a, not a progressive, but more of a technologically driven attitude towards things. And, Cornyn's been in office since 2002. So, and before that he was the Attorney General. But when he got into office, John Cornyn was 50 as U.S. Senator. So I'm just saying that there is an energy level that the country requires because it moves so fast, driven by technology, that the attitudes and values that people have almost a generation or two generations ago don't relatively sync with the younger generation or a generation method like millennials, but Gen X or something, where they this is where we're at now. What you represent is, yes, you may have wisdom for us, and I'm assuming that there's values that you are instilled with and attitudes that you were instilled with back in your formidable years that don't necessarily represent where our country needs to go right now. And I can hear a lot of people may think this is, a crass attitude, but if I could have Barack Obama for a third term, I'd vote for him. Am I going to vote for somebody who's 81 or 82 next year? When I have Gavin Newsom out in California, which probably won't set well with Texas, or Amy Klobuchar, or some other younger person who's got the credentials that can actually, Barack Obama was a unique figure. But Barack Obama was 18 hours. After dinner, he was back in the office reading papers. He was constantly moving, constantly going, because he knew what the office was and what a grind it was. So I've basically, if I haven't, I totally irated everybody else yet in your audience.
Oh, no. Well, we like new ideas here. We like new ideas. So the 28th Amendment is what you want to call it. Is there any nickname or tagline to refer to it as?
It's the Next Amendment. It's
the what amendment?
The Next Amendment.
Next Amendment. Okay.
Yeah. It's not an age thing, or it's not necessarily term limits, because we don't measure it in terms. We measure it in calendar years, and
okay.
And it's basically you could call it a public service amendment if you want, because that's basically what it is. You're there for a certain amount of time, and then you got 12 elections to deal with if you're a House member, or 4 if you're a senator, or 3 if you're a senator before. But anyway, there's a lot to do there. But what I don't like is when people get committee assignments and you can't pry them out.
Yeah.
And who's that senator from Iowa? It's not Ernst, it's the other one. Grasswell, I think his name is. He's 90 years old. He's been part of the Grassley. That's it. And he's been there since he's 89. He's been in there. He was a representative in 1975 to the 3rd District, and till 1981. So he's been in there since 1981. He holds a huge sway with the Farm Bill, because he's one of those 43 senators that deal with corn. And He's he serves as the longest. He's one of the longest serving members of U.S. Congress. So, John Dingell was in there for 59 years, and then Byrd was in there for 57. And there's people who've been in there for a long time, but you can see why the younger generation doesn't want to vote for any of these people, because they don't really represent them.
Sure. Makes sense. Sure.
And, most of these people who were longest serving in retired, resigned, died. In fact, the ones that I'm looking at over the years, there's only one I see that was defeated, which was a long time ago, but this was in the 1800s. But the top, Dingell was in there for 59 years, so he retired, and then Byrd was in there for 57. He died. And then there was one from Daniel Inouye in Hawaii. He died. So there's people that, I want you to look at this, if your audience is geared to the youth, is that the youth need to cultivate their own leaders. And they need to be able to get behind them so that when they show up at the voting block at the polls, they're going to say, okay, this is our voice, this is our generation, this is who we need right now at this time. And, this is the attitude, this is our attitudes, and this is where we want our country to go. So I'm not casting the ageism out, but if my retirement age is 65, I'm looking forward to my retirement. I'm not looking forward to something I get to do in my retirement.
Okay. Makes sense.
I don't know if that is that's discriminatory. Yes, there is age with wisdom, or wisdom with age, but how do you convince somebody who's 70 years old to talk to somebody who's 35 that this is the way you need to go? As opposed to somebody who's 50 who says, look, kid, I've been here for 16 years. I know where you want to go. Let's go this way. I want to mentor you. I want not only want to mentor you, I want to get involved in your ideas. If I'm 70, 75 years old, I'm not interested in what, you're just somebody I have to talk to.
Interesting perspective. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's a matter of flexibility as well. Older people may be more set in their ways.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing that shows up in the ballots, if you want to look at this, if there's ballots in states that say just mark your party on top, if you want all Democrats or all Republicans, those are something that, you're not voting for character then, or the character of the candidate, you're voting for the party.
Yep.
And, there's a lot of character of the candidate that needs to be defined. And you get some people like, I don't know if Georgia has it, but there's some hotheads in the House. There's some people who are, you just question their character in particular. I can think of Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. He was all Trump's a complete idiot. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. He has to kiss the ring every time he mentions Trump. So these are people who are you don't know where they stand. They don't hold themselves accountable. Lindsey Graham was an unindicted co-conspirator in the Georgia case, and yet you can see him try to squirm out of it. So anyway, that's a different story. This isn't, I think that there's a lot of things that there's a reformation that needs to happen in this country to pry basically the parties out of controlling both voting and redistricting.
Yes. And your argument is very pertinent because in the last election, one of the criticisms was we have these two, they're both old. They're both old. And then a lot of people are afraid that we're going to have the same thing again. Those two guys are going to run again against each other.
Right. Who was the senator from El Paso, the representative who ran against Greg Abbott in Texas.
Beto.
Yeah, Beto. He was somebody who, this is energy and character that is waiting to take over or waiting to ascend into the Senate race or something like that, which, but the attitudes are, well, that's, and I don't know what Texas is. Texas is pretty conservative. They want things to stay the way, most southern states want a little bit of repetition and certainty. But this is energy like Katie Porter, like I said before, Katie Porter in California, who can go in front of Jamie Dimon and say, your people can't survive on what you're paying them for starting pay. And Dimon says, yeah, I'm going to look into that, and you made a change. And if she loses that race to Adam Schiff, that's the Elizabeth. That was the next Elizabeth Warren, or the next Bernie Sanders that was going to be coming into office. Okay. And that segment of a population that says this is not good for us. What corporations are doing and how people are getting shafted or whatever the banks are. That voice has died down. So you can imagine the corporate people or the campaign contributors who would rather have Adam Schiff than Katie Porter. I'm sure there's a lot of big money from a lot of banks and corporations that would rather have Adam Schiff than Katie Porter. I assume that. I don't know that. So, we had in our Senate race last year or 2 years ago with Susan Collins. We had a candidate who was, more liberal and progressive, but she was running against the Speaker of the House, and Emily's list was able to just, this is for the Democratic nomination, Emily's list was able just to send out an email, and next thing you know, this speaker has $7 million. Well, Chuck Schumer wanted this speaker to be the candidate because he didn't want another, Betsy Sweet was more of like a progressive like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Chuck Schumer didn't need another headache in the Senate. He wanted somebody who can comply or get in line with what he's thinking. And there's something to be said about community assignments too, because a lot of things don't get brought up because the people in charge don't want to put them out. They want their position to be set. So,
yeah.
I hope I haven't given you too much, but
no, it's good stuff. Good stuff. It's like I was saying, it's a perspective. We talked about a lot of issues on this podcast, a lot of different reform ideas. This one is distinct. It's something new, so I'm glad we brought it to the table today.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to. I'm glad you called me and reached out to me, and I was happy to share in it. And then if you want the alternative presidential primary schedule, I can send that to you also. So. Yeah, I would like to look at that. So for our audience, how can they help you in your efforts? Right now, I'm kind of locked in on taking care of my dad. So,
okay.
He's in hospice, and I'm trying to get done. But there's it's just on the 28th Amendment. The 28th is what the name of the Facebook page is.
Okay.
It's a term limit, but I should change that to it should be a term of service, a federal term of service constitutional amendment.
Okay.
I don't want to get affiliated with Ted Cruz because Ted Cruz is going on the basis of something that happened back in, what one of the founding fathers said, like I said before, that, they should serve 2 Senate terms and 3 House terms. Well, that was a totally different thing back then.
Yeah.
But Senator Cruz is a originalist, so he took those terms, even though he's now on his 3rd term, or he's going to be running for his 3rd term as a U.S. Senator. So technically, if he had any integrity, he would just not run for the 3rd term because said he wasn't.
Yeah, we could use someone else. Yeah, we could definitely use someone else.
Yeah, and Beto was these type of energetic candidates, and I'm going to use that word loosely, energetic, but these kind of populist. Hey, they speak to a younger generation. These are the ones that need to be cultivated by the generations of Gen X and millennials. Like, okay, I get what you're saying. And then you got to hold them accountable. You got to hold them to their integrity and say, you said this, why aren't you doing this? Jon Stewart of the Daily Show was great at calling people out. He said this, now this doesn't happen. Glaring example, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. He said Trump was an absolute disaster, and now you have to say his name just to keep your base in line. So now you're basically running scared. So,
yeah. Mike, we thank you for coming on the podcast today and talking about your novel reform idea.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me on there, and I will send the alternative. Actually, I'll just see. It's a document, and I've just at the cusp of the computer age, so I'll try to figure out how to send it over to you in the message. Okay?
Okay, sounds great. We wish you all the best in your personal and professional endeavors and everything you do in life.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, take care and all the best.
All right. Bye-bye.